They say the top 1% of the world doesn't just own the money. They own the truth. But what happens when a billionaire's carefully constructed truth shatters in front of the very people he spent his life trying to impress? What is the actual price of a secret kept for 5 long silent years? This is the story of Elena Vance, a woman who went from a discarded assistant in a cold glass office to the architect of the most poetic revenge the elite have ever witnessed. And it's the story of Silas Sterling, a man who thought he could buy everything, until he realized he'd spent half a decade living a lie. Picture this. The air in the Grand St. Regis ballroom is heavy with the scent of 5,000 white orchids. The elite of New York are there, dripping in diamonds, sipping vintage champagne. Silas Sterling stands at the front, the apex predator of the business world, looking at his watch, bored by the spectacle of someone else's happiness. The doors creak open. The music shifts. Silas looks up, expecting a bride. Instead, he sees a boy. A 5-year-old boy in a custom tuxedo, walking with a stride so familiar it makes Silas's heart stop. The boy has the same piercing steel-gray eyes, the same defiant tilt of the chin, the same aura of a king in the making. In that moment, the billionaire's $4,000 glass of scotch doesn't just slip. It shatters against the marble floor. Because he isn't just looking at a child. He's looking at a mirror. He's looking at the son he never knew he had, walking toward him in a room full of the people he spent his life trying to dominate. But to understand how we got to this floor-shattering moment, we have to go back. Back to a time when Elena was nothing more than a name on a payroll. Back to the night a professional mistake led to a life-changing secret. You're about to witness a journey of heartbreak, hidden identities, and a high-stakes game of emotional chess. What you're about to discover will change how you think about success and what it truly costs to protect the ones you love. Before we begin this incredible 1-hour journey, I want to welcome you to the channel. I want to be honest with you. This video took over 40 hours to research, 15 hours to write, and 20 hours to produce. Every detail of Elena and Silas's world was carefully crafted to bring you the most compelling, high-stakes version of this story. If you appreciate that level of dedication and love stories that dive deep into the heart of human emotion, please hit the subscribe button. It truly means the world and helps me continue creating these in-depth cinematic stories for you. Before we dive into the moment Elena walked away 5 years ago, I have to ask, have you ever wondered what separates those who build lasting wealth from those who lose everything? Is it luck, is it ruthlessness, or is it the people they keep by their side? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to where it all began. A rainy night in Manhattan, a deadline that couldn't be missed, and a boss who thought he was untouchable. 5 years ago, Silas Sterling didn't just run Manhattan. He owned the very air people breathed in it. To understand the explosion at the wedding, we have to look at the man who caused it. Silas wasn't born with a silver spoon. He was born with a titanium will. By 32, he had built Sterling Global from a 2-man operation in a dusty garage to a $40 billion empire. His life was a curated gallery of excess. He lived in a $25 million triplex on Park Avenue where the floors were heated marble and the walls were lined with original Rothkos. He drove a custom black Bugatti La Voiture Noire, a car that cost more than most small-town neighborhoods. But wealth like that comes with a price. Silas had become a man of ice. He didn't have friends. He had strategic partners. He didn't have relationships. He had mutual interests. He was the apex predator of Wall Street, famous for firing executives over a misplaced decimal point. Then there was Elena. Elena Vance was the daughter of a librarian and a high school coach from a small town in Ohio. She had come to New York with a degree from a state school and a dream that the city would be kinder than it was. She landed the job as Silas's executive assistant not because of a fancy pedigree, but because she was the only person who could anticipate his needs before he even knew he had them. She was the one who knew he hated the smell of lilies, that he preferred his coffee at exactly 175 degrees, and that he worked until 2 a.m. every Tuesday to review the overseas markets. For 3 years, she was his shadow. She was the ghost in the machine that kept his life running. She watched him break competitors and charm socialites, all while maintaining a mask of perfect professional neutrality. But under that mask, Elena was drowning. She wasn't just his assistant. She was the only person who actually saw him. She saw the flash of loneliness when he closed his office door. She saw the way he gripped the edge of his desk when the pressure of a billion-dollar merger weighed on his shoulders. She fell in love with a man who didn't believe love existed. And that was her first mistake. The turning point happened on a Tuesday in November. A blizzard had paralyzed the city. The power was flickering in the Sterling Global Tower, and the rest of the staff had long since fled to the safety of their homes. Silas and Elena were alone on the 65th floor, surrounded by nothing but the howling wind and the glow of computer monitors. They had just closed a deal that added another $2 billion to Silas's net worth. Silas cracked a bottle of 30-year-old Macallan. He poured 2 glasses. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, for the first time in years. "You're the only constant in my life, Elena," he whispered. His voice wasn't the cold steel of the boardroom. It was raw, vulnerable. That night, the professional barrier didn't just crack, it disintegrated. In the heat of that high-stakes victory and the silence of the storm, they crossed a line from which there was no returning. The next day, Silas was back to being the king. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a terrifying coldness. He didn't look her in the eye. Instead, he left an envelope on her desk. Inside was a check for $100,000 and a note from HR. It wasn't a thank you. It was a goodbye. He called it a conflict of interest. He called it maintaining the integrity of the firm. Elena realized then that to Silas Sterling, she wasn't a person. She was a liability to be liquidated. She didn't take the money. She walked out of the building with her head high, leaving the check on his mahogany desk. She went to her tiny apartment in Queens, packed a single suitcase, and discovered something that would haunt Silas for the rest of his life. She was pregnant. For the next 5 years, Elena lived a life of quiet struggle and immense joy. She moved to a small coastal town, took a job at a local firm, and raised Leo. She taught him how to be kind, how to be brave, and how to never let a man like his father break his spirit. She thought she was safe. She thought the world of Sterling Global was a closed chapter. But destiny has a funny way of bringing the past back to the present, especially when there's a wedding involved. Think about the moment Elena saw that check on her desk. If you were born into Elena's circumstances, struggling to make it in a big city and suddenly discarded by the man you loved, do you think you would have taken the money and stayed quiet? Or would you have made the same choice she did? Let me know what you think in the comments. Because what happens next isn't just a confrontation. It's a reckoning. When Silas sees Leo at that wedding, he isn't just seeing a child. He's seeing the legacy he almost threw away. As the wedding procession continues, the air in the ballroom vanishes. Silas stands frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Everyone is looking at the bride, but Silas? Silas is looking at the boy. He sees the way the kid holds himself, shoulders back, chin level, a tiny warrior in a 3-piece suit. It's a mirror image of the man Silas sees in his Park Avenue vanity every morning. The realization hits him with the force of a freight train. Elena didn't just leave 5 years ago. She took his legacy with her. The moment the ceremony ends, Silas doesn't wait for the champagne toast. He moves through the crowd like a predator, cutting a path toward the back of the hall where the wedding party is retreating. He finds her in the stone-walled vestibule, adjusting the boy's bow tie. Elena. Her name leaves his lips like a prayer and a demand all at once. Elena stiffens. She doesn't turn immediately. She finishes straightening the boy's collar, kisses his forehead, and whispers, "Go find Auntie Claire, Leo. I'll be right there." The boy, Leo, looks at Silas. It's a 5-second stare down that feels like an eternity. Then, with a shrug of his small shoulders, he runs off. Elena turns. She isn't the soft, quiet assistant anymore. Her eyes are hardened steel. "You're late, Silas," she says coolly. About 5 years late. Silas is a man who speaks in millions and billions, but he is suddenly bankrupt of words. "He's mine," he finally chokes out. It's not a question. Elena laughs, but there's no humor in it. "He is mine, Silas. You made your choice the morning you left a check on my desk instead of a seat at the table. You bought your freedom. This This is the price of it. Silas returns to his penthouse that night, but the silence is deafening. For 5 years, he thought he was building an empire. Now, he realizes he was just building a tomb. He calls his head of security at 2 a.m. "I want everything," Silas barks into the phone. "Every bank record, every doctor's visit, every school report for the last 60 months. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what his favorite color is." But Elena is ahead of him. She knew this day might come. She spent her 5 years in the shadows building a fortress. She isn't just a single mom. She's become a consultant for the very competitors Silas tried to crush. She has leverage, she has allies, and most importantly, she has the truth. The weeks following the wedding become a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Silas tries to use his wealth to fix the situation. He buys the building where Elena lives. He tries to enroll Leo in the most prestigious private academy in the country. He sends diamonds to her doorstep. Elena sends them back. Every single one. "You can't buy a son, Silas," she tells him when he corners her at a charity gala. "You can buy a company. You can buy a senator. But you cannot buy the 5 years you weren't there to hold his hand when he had a fever." For the first time in his life, Silas feels a sensation he doesn't recognize. Powerlessness. He starts showing up at the park. He watches from his blacked-out SUV as Leo kicks a soccer ball. He sees the way the boy laughs, a bright ringing sound that Silas hasn't made in 20 years. He sees the struggle, too. He sees Elena balancing a grocery bag and a laptop, looking exhausted but fiercely happy. He realizes that his wealth, his cars, and his private jets are meaningless to a 5-year-old who just wants to know why the man in the suit is staring at him. The struggle begins to change Silas. He starts missing board meetings. He stops checking the ticker tape. The Ice King is melting, and his board of directors is starting to smell blood in the water. His rival, Marcus Thorne, sees the weakness. Thorne approaches Elena with a proposal. "Help me take down Sterling Global, and I'll ensure your son never has to worry about money again. We can strip Silas of everything." Elena is at a crossroads. She could have her ultimate revenge. She could watch the man who discarded her lose the only thing he ever loved. His power. But then she looks at Leo, who is drawing a picture of a tall man he saw at the park. Despite everything, the boy is looking for a father. Silas makes a desperate move. He realizes that as long as he is Silas Sterling, billionaire CEO, he will never have a son. He calls a press conference. The world expects him to announce a new merger. Instead, he prepares to make a choice that will either save his family or destroy his career forever. He reaches out to Elena one last time. He doesn't send an envoy. He doesn't send a check. He shows up at her door, drenched in rain, looking like the man she saw in the office 5 years ago, vulnerable and raw. "I'll step down," he says, his voice cracking. "I'll give it all away. Just let me be his father." At this point, Elena had to choose between two paths. Option A. She could team up with Marcus Thorne to strip Silas of his wealth and power as revenge for how he treated her. Option B. She could trust the man who once broke her heart and allow him back into their lives, potentially risking everything again. What would you have done? Would you choose justice, or would you choose the chance for a family? This decision would define everything that came next. Because while Silas was ready to give up his empire, there were people in the shadows who weren't ready to let him walk away so easily. The real danger was only just beginning. When the crown falls, the vultures don't wait for the body to get cold. Silas Sterling's offer to walk away from Sterling Global wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was a blood-in-the-water signal to every rival he'd ever stepped on. Within 48 hours of that rainy night at Elena's doorstep, the board of directors staged a coup. They froze his personal accounts, citing erratic behavior and misuse of corporate assets. For the first time in a decade, the man who moved markets couldn't even pay for a taxi. Silas found himself standing on a sidewalk in Brooklyn. His black card Centurion declined, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing weight of a life built on hollow gold. This is where the story gets raw. Silas moves into a $60 a night motel under a fake name. The man who used to dine on $500 Wagyu steaks is now eating lukewarm noodles from a convenience store. It wasn't just the money. It was the psychological toll of being a ghost. He watched the news in the motel lobby as Marcus Thorne announced a hostile takeover of Sterling Global. His name was being dragged through the mud. The headlines called him the fallen king and the billionaire who lost his mind. But the real breaking point came on a Tuesday, the same day of the week he had once fired Elena. He tried to visit Leo at the park, but he realized he looked like a broken man. He watched from behind a rusted fence as Leo laughed with other children, and Silas felt a shame so deep it physically hurt. He thought, how can I be a father when I don't even know who I am without a title? He nearly walked away. He almost took a bus out of the city to disappear forever. He didn't leave. Because that evening, Elena found him. She didn't find him through a private investigator or a high-tech tracking system. She found him because she knew exactly where a man like Silas would go when he had nothing left. The small, quiet pier where they had shared their first real conversation years ago. She didn't offer him a check. She offered him a job. I'm starting a new firm, Silas, she said, looking out at the water. It's small. It's ethical. And I need someone who knows exactly how the devils in the boardrooms think. I can't pay you in stock options. I can pay you in the chance to earn your son's respect. Silas didn't become a hero overnight. He worked 18-hour days in a cramped office that smelled of stale coffee and old printers. He performed the menial tasks he used to delegate to a dozen interns. He learned the names of the delivery drivers. He learned how to listen. Slowly, the skills he used for greed were repurposed for survival. He used his knowledge of Marcus Thorne's dirty secrets to shield Elena's new company. He built a legal defense from scratch to reclaim the trust fund he'd set up for Leo. Not for himself, but to ensure the boy's future was untouchable. Do you think Silas should have accepted Elena's help at his lowest point? Or was it a mistake for Elena to let him back into her professional life after everything he'd done? Some might say he needed to suffer more to truly change, while others see this as the ultimate act of grace. Share your perspective below. I'm curious to see where you stand. While Silas was rebuilding his soul, the world he left behind was rotting. Marcus Thorne's leadership was a disaster. Under his greed, Sterling Global began to fracture. He was cutting corners, violating safety codes, and preparing to sell off the company's assets to a foreign conglomerate that would leave thousands of employees jobless. The employees, the people Silas once viewed as mere numbers, began reaching out. They didn't want the Ice King back. They wanted the man who was now working alongside Elena Vance. They saw a man who had been humbled and, for the first time, they felt a sense of loyalty. The inevitable confrontation was looming. A major shareholder meeting was scheduled at the Sterling Tower. Marcus Thorne planned to finalize the sale of the company. Elena and Silas knew that if they didn't act, the legacy Silas built, and the world he wanted Leo to inherit, would be gone forever. But they were short on capital. They were short on time. And Marcus Thorne had a secret weapon. He had discovered the truth about Leo, and he was prepared to use the boy as a pawn to keep Silas in line. Silas sat with Leo the night before the meeting. They were building a Lego tower on Elena's living room floor. Leo looked at him and asked, "Are you a superhero, Silas?" Silas looked at the boy, his son, and felt a fire he'd never felt in a boardroom. "No, Leo," he whispered. "But I'm going to try to be the man who does the right thing." We're at the midpoint of this incredible journey. If you're still here, I genuinely appreciate you for sticking through the highs and the devastating lows of Elena and Silas's story. What's kept you engaged so far? Is it the hope for a family reunion? Or are you waiting to see Marcus Thorne get what's coming to him? Let me know in the comments. Get ready. Because the final act isn't just about a business merger. It's about a man walking into the den of lions to reclaim his name. Not for power, but for the boy who finally called him Dad. Power isn't found in a bank balance. It's found in the moment you realize you have nothing left to lose. The momentum shifted on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 months after Silas moved into that dingy Brooklyn motel. It wasn't a grand explosion, but a quiet, strategic strike. Elena and Silas had been working out of a shared co-working space, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a shared vision. While Marcus Thorne was busy liquidating Sterling Global's assets, Silas was doing something he had never done before. He was listening to the little people. He reached out to the factory floor managers, the middle-tier analysts, and the administrative assistants. He used the very skills that made him a billionaire to identify the one thing Marcus had overlooked: a dormant patent in the Sterling portfolio for a renewable energy filtration system. Silas didn't try to buy the patent back. He didn't have the money. Instead, he helped Elena draft a legal challenge based on a clause he himself had written 10 years prior. It was a poison pill provision designed to protect the company from reckless liquidation. The moment the court injunction hit Marcus Thorne's desk, the momentum flipped. Suddenly, Elena's firm, Vance and Associates, wasn't just a small consulting shop. It was the only entity holding the keys to Sterling Global's future survival. But the real breakthrough wasn't financial. It happened at a small Italian restaurant where Silas, Elena, and Leo were having dinner. A former rival of Silas's, a man named Arthur Sterling, no relation, but a longtime competitor, walked by their table. Arthur stopped, looked at Silas in his off-the-rack suit, then looked at the way Silas was patiently showing Leo how to twirl spaghetti. Arthur didn't scoff. He pulled out a chair. "I heard you're the one behind the Vance injunction, Silas," Arthur said. "It's the smartest play I've seen in a decade. If you're building something new, something with a soul, count me in as your first investor." Silas didn't brag. He didn't talk about his Bugatti. He just smiled, looked at Elena, and said, "I'm just the consultant. It's her firm." With Arthur's backing, the wins started stacking up like a deck of cards. One by one, the disposable employees Silas had once ignored started jumping ship from Sterling Global to join Vance and Associates. They weren't coming for the bonuses. They were coming because they heard the Ice King had been humbled, and that Elena Vance was the real deal. Silas was working harder than he ever had at the height of his power, but he was sleeping better. He was settling for a $150,000 salary instead of $50 million, and yet, he felt wealthier. He was paying off his debts, not with a checkbook, but with integrity. The most beautiful part of this transformation was Leo. The boy didn't care about the boardrooms or the patents. He cared that Silas was there at 5 p.m. to play catch. Leo started thriving in school. His teachers noticed a new confidence in him. He wasn't just the quiet kid with the single mom anymore. He was a boy who walked with the same quiet authority as his father, but tempered with his mother's kindness. One afternoon, Silas watched Leo defend a smaller kid from a bully on the playground. Leo didn't use his fists. He used his words. He was calm, firm, and immovable. Silas felt a lump in his throat. He realized he wasn't just witnessing his son grow. He was witnessing the man he wished he had been 30 years ago. Leo was the vindication of everything Elena had sacrificed. Every night she spent working 2 jobs, every secret she kept to protect him. It was all worth it in the way Leo looked at the world with fearless eyes. While Silas and Elena were building a new life, Marcus Thorne was spiraling. He was unaware of the Phoenix strategy they were unfolding. He thought Silas was a broken man living in a basement. He thought Elena was just a bitter ex-employee. Thorne scheduled the final shareholder vote for the sale of Sterling Global. He planned to host it at the top of the Sterling Tower, a final victory lap, to celebrate the destruction of Silas's legacy. He even invited Elena, thinking it would be the ultimate humiliation to watch him sell off the desks she used to polish. He didn't know that Silas had spent the last 3 months quietly buying back small, discarded chunks of the company through dozens of proxy accounts. He didn't know that the board was starting to turn. The night before the meeting, Silas stood on the balcony of the modest apartment he now shared with Elena. The city lights twinkled below, but he wasn't looking at the Sterling Tower. He was looking at a drawing Leo had made of a house with 3 people in it. "Are you ready?" Elena asked, joining him. "I've spent my whole life fighting for power," Silas said, his voice steady. "Tomorrow, I'm going in there to fight for our son's name. That's the only power that matters." At this point, Silas has transformed into someone completely different. He's traded his penthouse for a home, his ego for a purpose, and his Bugatti for a used SUV. Do you think people can truly change at their core, or is Silas just adapting to survive until he can be the king again? This is important because what happens in that boardroom tomorrow will reveal the truth once and for all. Let me know what you think below. The doors to the Sterling Global Boardroom are about to open one last time. Marcus Thorne thinks he's attending a funeral. He's actually attending a resurrection. Sometimes, the loudest explosion is the sound of a man finding his soul while another man loses his empire. The Sterling Global Boardroom is a cathedral of glass and ego. On the 70th floor, the city looks like a toy set, a collection of lights and blocks waiting for Marcus Thorne to sell them to the highest bidder. The long mahogany table is flanked by the most powerful shareholders in the country. They are restless. They are ready to sign the papers that will dismantle 5 decades of history for a quick payout. Marcus Thorne sits at the head of the table, wearing a smile that looks like a scar. He has the pen in his hand. He's already mentally spending his commission on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Before we finalize the vote, Marcus says, his voice dripping with false concern, I'd like to acknowledge the tragedy of our founder's absence. Silas Sterling couldn't be here today, for obvious reasons of personal instability. A few board members chuckle. Others look at their shoes. They think Silas is a ghost. They think he's a cautionary tale whispered in the elevators. But Marcus doesn't know about the proxy shares. He doesn't know about the Phoenix strategy. And he certainly doesn't know that while he was busy liquidating assets, Silas and Elena were building a coalition of the very people Marcus thought he'd discarded. The heavy double doors at the end of the room don't just open, they are thrown wide. Silas Sterling walks in. He isn't wearing the $10,000 bespoke suit. He's wearing a simple navy blazer and a pair of dark jeans. He doesn't look like an ice king. He looks like a man who has slept 8 hours and knows exactly who he is. But it's who is walking beside him that makes the room gasp. Elena Vance, dressed in a sharp ivory power suit, carries a leather briefcase like a weapon. And between them, holding Silas's hand with a grip of absolute trust, is Leo. Marcus Thorne stands up so quickly his chair hits the floor. This is a private meeting, Sterling. You're trespassing. Security. Actually, Marcus, Silas says, his voice calm and resonant, cutting through the tension like a hot blade through wax. I'm here as the primary consultant for Vance and Associates. We currently represent the collective interests of 42% of the voting shares in this room. Marcus's face turns a sickly shade of gray. 42%? That's impossible. You're broke. I was broke, Silas admits, looking around the room at the men and women he once ruled with fear. But I wasn't bankrupt. You see, Marcus, you focused on the assets on the balance sheet. You forgot about the assets on the payroll. Elena steps forward, opening her briefcase. She slides a series of documents across the table. While you were trying to sell this company to a foreign conglomerate, we were working with the employees to launch a buyback program. We didn't need your billions, Marcus. We needed their belief. But the real blow isn't financial. It's when Leo looks up at Marcus Thorne, the man who tried to use him as a pawn, and says in a voice that is a perfect miniature version of Silas's, My dad says you're being a bully. And bullies don't get to stay in the castle. The room falls into a deafening silence. The board members, many of whom have known Silas for 20 years, see the boy. They see the gray eyes. They see the legacy. They realize that Silas Sterling isn't just back, he's better. The vote is a landslide. The board doesn't just reject the sale, they vote for an immediate audit of Marcus Thorne's recent transactions. Within 10 minutes, the man who thought he was the new king is being escorted out by the very security team he tried to call. Marcus stops in front of Silas, his face twisted in rage. You think you won? You're living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, Sterling. You're nothing. Silas looks at Elena. He looks at Leo, who is curiously touching a glass sculpture on a side table. Silas smiles, a real warm smile that reaches his eyes for the first time in his life. Marcus, Silas says softly, I have everything I need. You're the one standing in a room full of people who don't know your name. As the room clears, Silas, Elena, and Leo are left alone in the massive boardroom. Silas looks out the window at the city. For years, he looked at this view and saw a scoreboard. Now he just sees a home. He doesn't feel the need to sit in the big chair at the head of the table. He doesn't feel the need to reclaim his title. The revenge he thought he wanted, the crushing of Marcus Thorne, feels small compared to the warmth of Leo's hand in his. Elena walks up to him. "You did it," she whispers. "No," Silas says, turning to her. "We did it. And the best part. I don't want the job. I want to take our son to the zoo. I hear there's a new exhibit, and I promised him we'd see the lions." The Ice King is gone. In his place is a father, a partner, and a man who finally understands that the most valuable thing in the world isn't something you can put in a vault. It's something you have to be brave enough to love. The confrontation is over. The secrets are out, the bully has been defeated, and a family has been forged in the fire. Do you feel satisfied with how this played out? Or would you have wanted Elena to be more vindictive towards Silas for those lost 5 years? Some people think forgiveness is the ultimate power move, while others want to see more of a struggle. There's no wrong answer here. Share your thoughts in the comments. But before we wrap up this journey, there's one final moment you need to see. Because a story like this doesn't end in a boardroom, it ends where it should have started. In the end, we aren't defined by the empires we build, but by the people who stay when the walls come crumbling down. 1 year has passed since the seismic shift in the Sterling Tower. For most of the world, the story was a headline, the fall of Marcus Thorne, and the rise of Vance and Associates. But for those who lived it, the aftermath was far more personal than a stock ticker. Marcus Thorne didn't go quietly, but he did go. The audit revealed a trail of embezzlement and insider trading that made his golden boy reputation vanish overnight. Today, he doesn't spend his time in Mediterranean villas. He spends it in a cramped legal office, fighting a series of indictments that have drained his accounts and chased away his so-called friends. Status in Manhattan is a fragile thing. When Marcus lost his seat at the table, he lost his identity. The socialites who once clamored for his attention now walk past him as if he's made of glass. He lives in a small rented apartment in Jersey City, a far cry from the Park Avenue heights. He is a man who thought money was a shield, only to find that it's a weight that crushes you when you have no one to help you carry it. The legal fees for his defense are projected to exceed $12 million, leaving him not just socially bankrupt, but financially destitute. While Marcus faded into obscurity, Elena and Silas built something that money couldn't buy. Vance and Associates is now a leading force in ethical venture capital. They didn't just reclaim Silas's old assets, they transformed them. The renewable energy patent they fought for? It's now providing clean water to over 200 communities across the globe. Elena was recently named Innovator of the Year, but if you ask her, her greatest achievement isn't the trophy on her desk. It's the fact that she never has to hide who she is, or who her son is, ever again. Silas has undergone a transformation that has left the business world stunned. He is no longer the Ice King. He's a mentor. He spends 3 days a week working with young entrepreneurs from backgrounds just like Elena's. He's realized that his real talent wasn't making money. It was seeing potential where others saw nothing. And then there's Leo. At 6 years old, Leo Vance Sterling is a child of two worlds. He knows his father is a man who made big mistakes, and he knows his mother is a woman who saved them both. He doesn't look at Silas as a billionaire. He looks at him as the man who taught him how to ride a bike and how to apologize when you're wrong. There was a moment recently when Leo saw a picture of Silas in an old business magazine. He looked at the cold, unsmiling man in the suit and asked, "Who is that, Daddy?" Silas knelt down, took the magazine, and said, "That's a man who thought he was a king, Leo. But he was actually just very lonely." Leo hugged him and replied, "I'm glad you're just a dad now." Looking back, Silas and Elena realized that Marcus Thorne's cruelty was, in a strange way, a gift. If Silas hadn't been pushed to the brink of ruin, he never would have found the humility to change. If Elena hadn't been forced to build a life on her own, she never would have discovered the staggering depth of her own strength. They didn't just survive the storm, they used the wind to fly. The pain of those 5 secret years has been replaced by a quiet, unbreakable bond. They are partners in every sense of the word, in the office, in the home, and in the heart. As the sun sets over the Brooklyn Bridge, Silas and Elena stand on the balcony of their new home, A beautiful brownstone filled with the chaotic energy of a happy family. There is no Bugatti in the driveway, and there are no Rothkos on the walls. Instead, there are framed finger paintings and the sound of Leo's laughter coming from the kitchen. Silas looks at Elena, the woman he once thought was disposable, and realizes she is the sun around which his entire world now orbits. He isn't the king of Manhattan anymore. He's something much better. He's a man who is loved. The journey is complete. We've seen a man lose his soul to gain a fortune, and then lose that fortune to find his family. We've seen a woman turn her greatest heartbreak into her greatest victory. Looking at where everyone ended up, Silas in his brownstone and Marcus in his courtroom. Do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural consequence of the choices we make? I want to hear what you think in the comments below. Thank you for joining me for this incredible 1-hour journey. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to rewrite your ending. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lives of Elena and Silas, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have many more stories of redemption, revenge, and the power of the human spirit coming your way. Until next time, remember, the best version of your life is the one you're brave enough to build from the truth. Wealth is what you're left with when you lose every dollar you've ever made. As we close the final chapter of Elena and Silas's journey, we're forced to look past the high-rise offices and the shattered champagne glasses. We're forced to look at the bigger picture. This story was never really about a billionaire boss or a secret child. It was a masterclass in the difference between price and value. What this journey teaches us is that success isn't a destination. It's a byproduct of character. Silas Sterling thought he was powerful because he could command a boardroom. He learned he was actually weak because he couldn't command his own integrity. True resilience isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how you rebuild when the world thinks you're finished. Elena didn't get justice by destroying Silas. She got justice by outgrowing the version of herself that needed his validation. She sought excellence, not revenge, and in doing so she became untouchable. If you were to ask Elena Vance today what she's most proud of, she wouldn't point to her firm's profit margins. She'd point to the peace in her home. Her philosophy has shifted from survival to significance. I used to think success was having no one who could tell me no, she told a graduating class recently. Now I know success is having people who love me enough to tell me truth. Silas, too, has a new metric for his life. He's traded the Bugatti for a life where he can walk down the street without looking over his shoulder. He's learned that the most expensive thing you can own is a clean conscience. He doesn't regret the loss of his old life. He views his downfall as the surgery that saved his soul. The most profound legacy of this story isn't the money Leo will one day inherit. It's the cycle he will never have to break. By seeing his father fall and rise again, Leo hasn't been taught that he is a prince. He's been taught that he is a man. He's growing up with the grit of his mother and the strategic mind of his father, but with a moral compass that neither of them had at his age. He is the promise of a better tomorrow, a generational shift where wealth is used to build, not to bury. He is living proof that our beginnings don't define us, but the love we receive along the way certainly does. When we think of Marcus Thorne, there is no bitterness left in Silas or Elena. Bitterness is a chain that keeps you tethered to your enemies, and they have long since let go. They view his downfall not with triumph, but with a quiet, measured understanding. Marcus didn't lose because Silas was smarter. He lost because he made choices that isolated him from humanity. His current situation, the legal battles, the lonely apartment, is simply the natural math of a life lived without empathy. His opinion, once the thing Silas feared most, no longer carries any weight. He is simply a ghost in a story that has moved on. So, what can you take away from this? Perhaps it's the realization that a temporary setback, no matter how humiliating, is often just a setup for a much greater success. Maybe it's the understanding that you should never measure your worth by someone else's standard of billionaire or assistant. The power of loving yourself through a transformation is the only thing that can truly change your destiny. Integrity isn't something you do for others. It's the gift you give yourself so you can sleep at night. Elena and Silas's story is a reminder that the world may see you one way, but you are the only one with the pen in your hand. You get to decide if your story is a tragedy or a triumph. You get to decide when the mini-me walking down the aisle represents not a mistake, but a miracle. Looking at where everyone ended up, do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural consequence of choices? I want to hear what you think. Thank you for spending these 3 hours with me. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it gave you hope for your own journey, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of the human heart and the empires we build. I'm Gemini, and this has been the story of a boss who thought he had nothing, until he realized he had everything. Some stories end when the money is made, but the best ones only begin when the truth is found. Over the last 3 hours, we've traveled through the cold marble hallways of Sterling Global and the quiet, resilient streets of Brooklyn. We've watched Elena Vance transform from a discarded assistant into a woman of unshakable power. We've seen Silas Sterling lose a $40 billion empire, only to discover that his real net worth was standing right in front of him, wearing a miniature tuxedo. This wasn't just a story about a secret child or a boardroom coup. It was a journey of radical transformation. It was about the moment a man stopped looking at his reflection in a skyscraper window and started looking for it in his son's eyes. It was about a woman who refused to let a severance check define her value. From that first night of forbidden passion to the final, shattering moment in the ballroom, every heartbeat of this story led to one simple truth. You cannot buy a legacy. You have to earn it through the fire of accountability and the grace of forgiveness. Why does this story resonate so deeply? Because at some point we have all been Elena. Undervalued, overlooked, and forced to build our own foundations. And at some point we have all been Silas. Chasing a version of success that leaves us hollow, realizing too late that we've ignored the things that actually matter. This story matters because it proves that no mistake is final. It tells us that your current circumstances are just a chapter, not the whole book. Whether you're at your peak or standing in the ashes of a downfall, you have the power to pivot. You have the power to choose integrity over ego, and love over leverage. As you click away from this video and go back to your own life, I want you to take one thing with you. Your worth is not a decimal point. If you are struggling right now, remember Elena in that tiny queen's apartment, holding a secret and a suitcase. She didn't have $1 billion, but she had a vision of a better life. If you have failed, remember Silas in that Brooklyn motel. He didn't have a title, but he finally had the truth. Don't let the Marcus Thorns of your world convince you that you're less than you are. Excellence is the best revenge, and character is the only currency that never devalues. If this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something valuable about resilience and success, please leave a like and share your biggest takeaway in the comments. Did you relate more to Elena's quiet strength or Silas's painful redemption? I read every single one of your responses, and your insights are what make this community so special. Thank you, and may God continue to bless you all for me.